So, the first question I had for you was, how did you get your position working on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and how familiar were you with the original series?
I started as an intern in 1990 with the Academy of TV Arts and Sciences. They have an excellent television internship program, and I was placed there as part of their script writing program. In June of 1990, the Best of Both Worlds Part 1 had just aired on Next Generation. And the showrunner and my mentor who hired me, Michael Piller, may he rest in peace, was writing, when I first met him, he was in his office writing Best of Both Worlds Part 2, trying to figure out how to beat the Borg. I'll always remember that. And that's kind of, where I started on an 8-week internship, and 17 years later, I was still there in the same building. So I never would have imagined that that would have been the case. And my familiarity with the original series was primarily the movies. I saw, up to that point, I had seen 5 of the movies, the first 5 movies, and was a big fan of the movies. I wasn't as familiar with the TV show, which I would get a lot of flack for years later. But when I met Gene Roddenberry, I got the sense that he wanted Next Gen to be different, and it wasn't a requisite that I had seen all the episodes of the original series, but obviously I would very soon. But I was a big fan of the movies. I was a fan of particularly Wrath of Khan and Voyage Home.
Well, as a Star Trek fan myself, I will tell you the same thing. Those are the best movies by far. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I remember standing in line in Westwood Village in Los Angeles on opening day of the Voyage Home. And back then, to get a good seat, you had to stand in line hours ahead of time. And going to the opening weekend was very exciting. I guess it still is for a lot of movies. And I'll never forget, how much the audience loved those characters.
That's so cool. When you were working on the episodes for Next Generation, what did you see as the themes? Was it like character arcs, or was it more along the lines of plot ideas?
Well, the Next Generation, I mean, once I set aside my terror of writing the show, because it was my first job, and I was lucky enough to write my first script with Ron Moore. Michael Piller paired us up, so I had a partner who I would work with many times, and the thing about Next Gen, the way I had to think about it to wrap my head around it was that it was an anthology show. And I had a profound love of the Twilight Zone. I knew every episode. I was kind of like a Star Trek fan would be to the original series. That's what I was like with the Twilight Zone. I had my Twilight Zone companion book, and I knew everything about every episode. And I kind of looked at I thought, well, this is the ethos of this show is one of optimism and exploration. And the character conflicts aren't really have to be earned between the characters. But really, I'm kind of rambling with this response. To me, you could do any kind of story on Next Generation. You could do a Western, you could do a time travel story, you could do politics, you could get into any theme that you could imagine. And different writers on the show gravitated toward different things. I was very, very much a concept-driven writer. I liked the big, high concept ideas, sometimes involving time travel, usually involving deconstructing reality in some fashion. I liked the big sci-fi let's be honest, Twilight Zone-like episodes. Ron Moore, We called him the Margaret Mead of the Klingons. He was the Klingon guy. Ron was great at kind of internecine politics and just really cool stuff. And other writers had different inclinations, but it's kind of like doing the Orville now. It's one of the things that Seth MacFarlane emphasized when we started doing the Orville was he wanted it to be like that. Like episodes could be about any character, it could be about any subject, it could be about any theme. You never knew what you were getting from week to week. And once I realized that that's what the show was to me, I was less scared of it because I knew I didn't have to write the kinds of episodes Ron Moore wrote because I couldn't. Really, I didn't have to write the kinds of episodes Jerry Taylor wrote. I could write my own kinds of stories, and that was very liberating. Sorry about the long response.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. And actually, being a huge Twilight Zone fan myself, I have the book as well, the Twilight Zone Companion. I can see that influence in the shows that you wrote for Next Gen and for Voyager, which I'll get into in a sec. But I always loved the anomalies, the time travel, the mind games. Like, what is reality? And I love that about your episodes. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank Rod Serling, really.
He was definitely one of my idols growing up. Ron, so you and Ron wrote All Good Things while at the same time you were working on Star Trek Generations. How did you get the gig to do essentially both at the same time, and how challenging was that?
I'm not entirely sure why it was decided that Ron and I would write the finale of TNG and then the first movie. You'd have to ask Rick Berman that question. I know why we did the finale. I guess we might have just been in line to do it. I think Michael Piller was probably had his hands full with Deep Space Nine at that point. As far as the movie goes, you'd have to ask Rick Berman. It may very well be that Ron and I weren't the first ones he approached. He might have been turned down by other writers. That's the only thing I can figure. But it just timed out that way, and it was fine. It was very challenging at times to be jumping back and forth between them. But I also remember the time very fondly. Ron and I had a great time. And both stories were important for different reasons. One was the beginning of Next Generation, and one was the end of Next Gen, and one was a new beginning for Next Gen. So it was a little weird, like kind of wrapping up Next Generation, but knowing that you're also doing them in a movie. It was a little weird.
Well, you did an amazing job, I have to say. All Good Things is without a doubt one of the best finales of any show I've seen. So thank you.
I mean, yeah, it was fun to do.
And I'd love to talk to Rick and ask him that very question.
Good luck. Rick doesn't do interviews very often. So
that's what I've heard, yeah. Talk to me about creating Star Trek Voyager. How did that happen, and how did you end up helping create that show?
Oh, well, I didn't create Voyager. I mean, I certainly had a voice from early on in the show, but that show was created by Jerry Taylor and Rick Berman and Michael Piller. I was involved in the DNA of the show, but not in an official capacity, which is to say I was working with all of these people while it was happening, and I read the pilot and gave some feedback. And it was just at that time, Star Trek was just firing on all cylinders. Deep Space Nine had premiered. Next Gen was at its height. We had a movie coming out. Voyager was being made. All that stuff was happening at the same time. And we were on the cover of Time magazine, Kirk and Picard side by side, back when there were magazines. And Time magazine really meant something. It was incredibly cool and just busy and fun. And for me, I wasn't done with Next Gen, and I wasn't done with the kinds of storytelling the Next Generation could do. So Voyager was kind of a continuation for me. If Next Gen hadn't ended, I would have continued to work on it, because I think the show had more life to it. It just was decided to take it. The studio decided to take it off the air in its prime. Most shows go away when they've tapered off, but Next Gen was enormously popular when it went off the air. It's very unusual to take a show off at the height of its popularity after 7 years. Yeah.
I was sad to see that, but that sort of became the pattern.
Voyager was a continuation. You know, there are a lot of, you know, there were still some reality mind-bending concepts I still had left. I used them on Voyager.
That's for sure. I mean, you had Ensign Kim from an alternate universe stay on the show, for example.
Yeah.
Was there a problem with the network dealing with the episodic nature of Voyager? It felt like sometimes there was, you'd have something really heavy and amazing happen, and then the next week it'd be completely forgotten.
Well, I don't think, look, serialized television was not a thing back then, unless you were a daytime soap opera. There wasn't or a nighttime soap opera. There wasn't a lot of it. And Star Trek was a very lucrative franchise. And the standalone storytelling nature of the show, which was how it was created, which really makes for good allegorical storytelling. That's what went into syndication. That's accounted for a lot of the longevity of the show. You can think back to an episode and the concept behind that episode. If it was just pure serialization, I just don't think you would. I just don't think you would remember the one where the alternate Kim, you know, stayed aboard at the end. Each episode has its own complexion, and each one's different, as I say. And which was one of the powerful things about Star Trek. It could be different genres, different tones, different themes. It could be funny one week and dead serious the next. An episode could come along that changed, you know, the course of the Federation or whatnot. And in that regard, I thought Next Generation had just the right amount of continuity. It did have continuity. Things weren't forgotten. Picard got assimilated by the Borg. We picked that up. We didn't deal with it every week. You wouldn't want to. Voyager didn't have as much continuity because they were alone in the middle of nowhere. And you do need a little bit of a context in the larger universe. All they had was themselves and the crew. And yes, but I think that had the right amount of continuity as well. You know, it's yeah, the ship took a beating and it was pretty much okay the next week. But when you have replicators and stuff like that, you know, they would want their ship to be in the best shape it could be. I didn't see it as a failing of the show at all. I do think there were times when we tried to push more continuity, but we knew we had to be careful because of what the requirements the studio probably had for keeping the shows non-serialized. But you have to remember, serialization wasn't even in the ethos. It wasn't even like we sat around thinking, God, I wish we could just tell this one story all the way through. It just wasn't. It wasn't a thing. You know, it just wasn't.
That's a fantastic answer.
You know, until 24 came along and flipped everything on its head, and I would ironically go on to work on 24. Primetime shows were standalone episodes. You know,
I loved your work on 24 too, by the way. That show was amazing. What prompted the shakeup to bring on 7 of 9 in season 4?
You know, the show, you know, I'd have to think back. Yeah, I just remember it was in season 4 of Voyager. I was, I knew I was going to be I was starting to take the reins of the show. I knew that by season 5, I would be running the show. And I felt like we had to shake things up and that there was something missing from the show. And what was missing to me, and this is just my opinion, was Janeway didn't really have her Spock or Data. I didn't think. And I was just sitting at home one night and just thought, why don't we what would it mean to have a Borg crew member on the ship? And I remember calling Joe Manosky and Rick Berman and talking all night long about the possibility and what if the Borg kind of became the resident villains for Voyager. The Borg had not been developed at all, really, except the movie First Contact, and we kind of were very careful about using the Borg. But I was fascinated by the Borg, and I just thought it would be interesting to have one on board. And that's kind of where it started. And the design of the 7 of 9 character was such that we wanted her to impact all of the characters. Like each character would have its own relationship to her. And I really think that worked. It really did shake things up a little bit. It didn't reinvent the wheel of the show. The show was still the same premise. The captain was the captain. The crew was the crew. Yes, we lost Kes as a character, but I think the addition of 7 of 9 for me creatively galvanized the show and gave Janeway, I think, an interesting emotional investment to make in that character, kind of like a daughter.
Well, in my opinion, the Star Trek's best characters are the ones that are not quite human or are human but are trying to find their humanity. You mentioned Spock and Data. She fit right in that perfectly. And I thought she did an amazing job, and the show was great for it.
Look, there's no question that Gene Roddenberry, with the creation of Spock, created a science fiction archetype for a character that is responsible for the most popular characters, whether it's Data, 7 of 9, Odo on Deep Space Nine. And 7 of 9 really was at odds with her own humanity. She had mixed feelings about it. She had the Borg imperiousness about her, and she was struggling to reconcile her humanity. And every time she tries, it seems to backfire. So it was an interesting character in that way. And yeah, those are the classic characters.
What prompted the idea to bring back Barclay's character from a Next Gen? Because I thought that was another brilliant move you guys did.
On Voyager?
Yes, he was the one responsible for Pathfinder and hooking up the communications array, and Voyager finally being able to talk to Starfleet.
And I think he was, he first makes his appearance in an episode called Projections, where the concept being another mind bender. What if the holographic doctor, finds out he's real and that Voyager's the hologram? And I think that was Barclay's first appearance as a hallucination. I loved Barclay, and I think a lot of people did. He was just a fun, neurotic character in the future. I think people could relate to. He was a wonderful actor. And by the way, back on the subject of 7 of 9, you really have to credit Jerry Ryan, who brought that character to life. It's not easy playing those characters, I imagine. And she, to take a character who's ice cold and yet you're always feeling the emotion underneath the veneer. That's a lot to communicate for an actor. And she just was wonderful.
I always was amazed that LeVar Burton could act without having his eyes visible too.
Yeah. Well, yes, LeVar Burton's a wonderful actor, and he made it work for a while, but it got old, I think, at some point I think in the movie First Contact, we took the visor off, which
yes,
you realize was like no big deal. It's like, oh, it's still Geordi. You know,
exactly.
Doesn't need that contraption on his eyes.
So talk to me about why Voyager decided to go the route of DS9 and Next Gen and end with the 7th season.
Why it did?
Yes. Or was it the studio just deciding that they wanted to start the new series Enterprise, which I wanted to ask you about next?
Well, I think pouring some tea here. You're editing this, right? Are you editing?
Yeah, yes, you have no worries.
So I think Voyager ended after 7 seasons because, there 2 other shows ended after 7, and it felt like the right amount of time. And I think after that amount of time, the show starts to get more expensive. Ratings wise, I don't think it was where it was when it started, but even so, I'm not sure it would have lasted past 7 anyway. And this studio was already thinking ahead. I mean, I didn't work on the last season. I turned the reins of season 7 over to Ken Biller. I wasn't running the show at that point. I was working on the next one, Enterprise, which Rick Berman and I really wanted to wait a year or 2 before another Star Trek, because we didn't want to inundate people with one after another. I don't think the studio had that kind of patience. So we were working on Enterprise before Voyager was off the air.
What made you and Rick decide to go back in time to the beginning rather than move forward?
It was a topic of a lot of. There was a lot of discussion about going forward. The issue with going forward, and I'll be curious to see what Discovery does, because I heard they jumped forward like 1,000 years or something. Is that what it was?
It's less than 1,000, but it is a substantial number, and it's way past what we're familiar with.
The issue with going forward is, for Rick and I, was, well, what does a more futuristic phaser look like? What does it mean? We're already so far in the future. To be even farther, or further, I should say, it just was a little hard to imagine what it was going to be that looked, I don't know. We just felt that there was something cool about doing a prequel that picked up where the movie First Contact left off, where the Vulcans came and they seemed like the greatest thing ever. And mostly they were, except they were babysitting us because they realized that humans were ready to travel into deep space, but they kind of need a chaperone, and that just seemed like a great dynamic, and a period in Star Trek history where we could make the characters a little closer to you and me, going even farther in the future. I guess just further, I keep misusing the word, further in the future maybe wasn't appealing at that time, and maybe we were feeling after Voyager, because the thing about Voyager was you're like, we're in the Delta Quadrant where nothing's familiar and it's all new aliens and everything's going to be different. And then of course, it really wasn't that different, or not different enough for a lot of people who are like, well, it's still people with walking and talking like humans. And it's like, well, we didn't we need actors to play parts. It's like and maybe we were feeling a little bit of that, if you go more into the future, how's the storytelling going to be different? That's a big promise. That's a big, big promise. And I'll be interested to see what it's a very ballsy move on Voyager's part to jump into the future. I'll be very curious to see what they do. And maybe it was a failure of our imaginations, but we thought going back was cool. We thought it would be fun. And it was fun for us anyway.
Well, for the record, Scott Bakula can do no wrong, I think. But
no, Scott's the best. I just talked to him yesterday, I think it was. He's great.
I'm definitely a huge fan. I even watch NCIS New Orleans because he's in that. What prompted the Xindi arc for season 3?
Season 3 of Enterprise, we felt we needed to shake things up. We got picked up for a 3rd season. And, I don't remember what the ratings were. I know the show, there'd been a lot of Star Trek on at that point, at that time. And we just felt like we were telling some very good episodes. And I'm really proud of the show. But we just wanted to shake things up. And, 9/11 happened not long before Enterprise premiered. And 9/11 happened about 6 weeks before 24 premiered. And we saw in 24 that there was a shift in the way storytelling was being done, and that the audience was embracing this idea of the moral, the ambiguities involved in being attacked by an enemy, and what the lengths to which you should or should not go to protect yourselves. And we just thought, let's try a season that was serialized to a large extent, and let's have Earth attacked. We don't often attack Earth. If Earth was at stake in every episode every week, it would lose all of its impact. And in fact, if you look at the history of Star Trek TV shows, I wonder how many episodes had Earth at stake. Probably almost none. So we decided to go there. And I had this idea for the Xindi, the idea that what if there was a planetary system where other creatures aside from humanoids developed sentience and culture and technology. And that seemed cool. And we worked out this 3rd season arc. We had the whole thing, the rare occasion where we had the season figured out. We knew what we were going to do. And so it was a fun season to do. And I think it was really 24's influence.
Like I said, I was a huge fan of 24 as well, and I loved the Xindi arc, and season 4 of Enterprise was also quite good. It started tying in a little bit to the history that fans were familiar with.
Well, and remember, and I have to say, Deep Space Nine had already been experimenting with serialized storytelling before Enterprise did. Maybe not to that extent, or if they were telling one story, but they were doing it and doing it very well. And in the 4th season of Enterprise, I stepped away. Manny Koto, incredibly talented Manny Koto, had joined the staff in season 3 and really blew my mind. He totally knew how to write the show. And he did season 4, and he was a huge Star Trek fan, particularly of the original series. So he really sunk his teeth into the prequel aspect of the show. Season 3 really wasn't about the prequel stuff so much.
Right.
He went to town in season 4. And I've said before, I wonder if that's what the show should have been from the very beginning. We did some prequel stuff, but we were very selective and subtle about it. Manny went in full throttle, and it was very, very successful.
You and Rick, though, did come back and write the last episode. Could you talk about These Are the Voyages?
Yeah, Manny Cotto had just done, I used to do 2-parters on Voyager. I think he introduced the trilogy, right? Was he doing trilogies?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think Rick and I felt like we knew that our tenure on Star Trek was over. I just spent 15 straight years of my life on Star Trek. He just spent 18 years of his life on Star Trek. And we wanted to send a Valentine to the fans we had this idea that's a cool idea, that I thought of that final episode as a lost Next Generation episode. I'm like, let's just treat this is a Next Gen episode that happens to be about going to the holodeck where Riker is looking back at Captain Archer. And I thought that was a postmodern kind of way to kind of get another crew in there, 2 crew members, Riker and Troy, and commingle the 2 shows and send a Valentine to Star Trek, to the fans, to Star Trek, to say, hey, this is farewell to this kind of Star Trek, because that kind of Star Trek wouldn't reappear until Orville.
Exactly.
And a lot of people, whether or not the episode turned out, and of course, Trip, a beloved character, dies in the episode, Trip Tucker. Whether or not the episode turned out well, I don't remember, because all I remember liking the script, and then I remember the anger from the cast, some of the cast. And I've said before, Scott Bakula is he's the sweetest, strongest, level-headed guy, but he was mad. I recall that he was kind of was not happy. And I don't think a lot of people were happy that they didn't have their own episode to go out with. But I guess our feeling was they just had these massive trilogy epic episodes, and we just wanted to introduce a little bit of Next Gen in there. Anyway, that was the rationale, but it's a much maligned episode over the years. I should probably go back and watch it, but I'm afraid of what I'll see.
Well, as a fan, I understood what you were doing, and I appreciated that. My biggest thing was, honestly, I wanted to hear Scott Bakula's speech that changed everything forever. And the episode cut away before I could hear it. And I thought, oh no.
Well, by the way, that's a great note. That might have changed the whole damn thing for the better. So where were you?
Oh, sorry. I did get the memo to you in time.
That's such an obvious mistake, but yeah.
So you're done with Star Trek, and then you worked on 24. You also worked on Flash Forward, Terra Nova. Talk a bit about that, because especially with Flash Forward and Terra Nova, in my opinion, network television does not do sci-fi well.
Well, it was trying. It wanted to. And I think there are different reasons. I think Terra Nova should have continued, because in a lot of ways the show was very successful. And I'm surprised it didn't. I'm kind of glad it didn't in some ways, personally, because I got to do some other cool stuff. But yeah, I mean, and then there was a show called Threshold I did for CBS, and they were really scared. I mean, the people I developed the show with were great, but I think the higher up people were really scared of the show. They just didn't get it. And I wasn't really able to do the level of science fiction I wanted to do. It kind of became a police procedural with aliens. And it didn't quite work, despite a stellar cast led by Carlo Gugino and Peter Dinklage. The Flash Forward should have worked. It was a great concept. It was grounded science fiction, that it was contemporary, kind of like Threshold. But I think that show got a little lost in its own mythology and probably should have been a little more standalone. You know, there were billions of stories to be told because everyone had a Flash Forward. And, but that's, you know, kind of backseat driving in my case, because I just did the pilot and the first episode. I was doing 24 at the time as well, so I wasn't able to work on it. And I thought Terra Nova found its voice by the end of the first season, and I still maintain it should have continued. We had killer ideas for the second season, and you know, I really love that show.
I was a fan as well. I was very disappointed, but
it's you know, but TV has changed even since then. It's like, look at the amount of science fiction, and you know, I think, you know, probably Game of Thrones opened a lot more doors than we did. But there's a lot more of it now. But still on network television, I guess there isn't a lot of science fiction.
It's all streaming or like you mentioned, Game of Thrones was HBO.
I mean, Terra Nova was also ridiculously ambitious in its attempts to straddle two different time frames, distant future and distant past. It was with dinosaurs. You know, it's kind of like, it was a big, expensive show to do. And it, you know, I think it had to reach a certain level of success to stay on the air.
How did you get involved with Cosmos?
I was finishing up Terra Nova, and I got a call from Seth MacFarlane saying, "Do you know the show Cosmos?" And of course, I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" It was one of my favorite shows of all time, and he said, "Well, we're looking to do another season of it. Would you be interested in helping out?" And I said, "Are you kidding me? I mean, I can't believe I'm being asked this." And I met Anne Druyan, who wrote the original Cosmos in 1980 with Carl Sagan. And I ended up doing 2 seasons of it, helping Anne write it and direct it. And
I'm a huge fan. I remember when I was in high school sending Carl Sagan a birthday card.
Yeah, I mean, look, I saw it in high school too, and it really changed my life. It made me realize how I wanted to look at the world, and that was through kind of a critical thinking lens, and I didn't really understand what science was until I saw that show. And I was terrified to be a part of the new one, that it was gonna, what if it sucks? And it turned out pretty good. And the new season aired once on Nat Geo, but it's actually airing on Fox Network September, I don't know when this is happening, but September 22nd, Tuesdays at 8, Cosmos will be airing on Fox and then dropping on Hulu the next day. So that's where I hope people are really going to check out the new season.
That's excellent, because I was going to ask you that very question.
Yeah, it's kind of came and went on Nat Geo very quickly. Now it's going to get its prime time debut and streaming debut starting September 22nd. And I hope people check it out because it's a really, really good season of Cosmos.
Oh, and I love what you guys did with season 2, so I can't wait.
Yeah.
Um,
If you like season 2, you'll love this.
Talk to me about what prompted you to put on a director's hat.
I'd always wanted to direct. And I don't know why I didn't direct Star Trek episodes. I think it's probably because I was just too busy writing it. We did 26 episodes a year. I always was just so under the gun with the writing. To direct an hour of television, you got to take 3 or 4 weeks off. And I just never had that luxury. With Cosmos, we had all 13 episodes written ahead of time. It's the first time that's ever happened to me. And that seemed like a good opportunity to start. So that's when I started. And once I knew that I was capable of doing it, I just started building it into the projects that I do.
Please put me into the room like a fly on the wall when Seth talked to you about Orville, because I'm still stunned that Orville exists, let alone folks like you are working on it. And clearly Seth is a huge fan of Star Trek and what you guys did. Please walk me through that.
Well, I was just wrapping up a show called Salem that I had created with a writer named Adam Simon, which was a horror show.
That was on WGN, right?
It was on a network, a new network at the time. And I got a call from Seth, telling me about this idea he had called Orville. He'd written his pilot for it on spec, and Fox was interested in making a show. Seth and I had been friends at that point for 15 years, and we talked about Star Trek, and I think he always harbored an aspiration to do a Star Trek show or a show like Star Trek. And I think the things that really appealed to him had to do with 3 things. He wanted to do good science fiction. He wanted to do something with that classic allegorical standalone storytelling, which had all but disappeared from television, except maybe Law and Order and stuff like that. And he wanted to recapture that ethos of optimism, because so much of science fiction up to that point was negative and dark and apocalyptic, and and he wanted to get back to that allegorical type of storytelling, allegorical and anthological. And I remember that the pilot is a little more, let me put it this way. Seth's ambitions were to create a drama with comedy frosting. And what people were expecting was a comedy with drama frosting. And it was I think we both wondered, would people accept this? Because it wasn't promoted that way. And even the pilot episode was a little more emphatic with the comedy. And it's one of the reasons that the episode, what would become episode 3 of the Orville first season, was called About a Girl. That was one I directed. Seth wrote it. Was a really dramatic, kind of tragic story about gender reassignment and a child's gender at stake, and it ends tragically. Because we wanted to say, you know, this is really what the show is. So let's take this episode, let's put it up front and see, you know, let's just see if people accept the show. And they did. They did. And I'm glad. And the third season is even more dramatic. Third season's I think, gonna blow people's minds. It's really good.
Well, I have to say, when that episode aired about a girl and the ending, I went, wow, this is fantastic. I was completely blown away because you didn't cop out, essentially. And if a show was emphasizing comedy, it would have gone another direction.
I mean, look, there's some broad comedy in that episode. You'll notice.
Well, that's true.
But the dramatic subject matter had to be treated with extreme care and tenderness and seriousness. And the show gets real serious at times. And we found as we went along that we could balance those tones. But people had to accept this was, you know, at its core, a drama, kind of like MASH. You know, if I had to compare the show to anything, it would be MASH. MASH was a drama. It really was. The show, I remember as a kid being very confused by MASH. It's like, why are they laughing? And now there's blood and people are crying. And I couldn't reconcile the two tones. I think it took a more mature brain but it can be done. And that's, you know, we're proud of the show and happy to be making it. On pause at the moment, production, about half.
Well, of course. There's a two-parter. I know you wrote one of the two from last season called Identity.
Yeah, I wrote part one, yes.
Yeah, talk to me about that, because honestly, that sort of changed the character arcs and the whole universe of Orville forever, really.
Yeah, that was kind of like, that's where we reveal that Isaac, who is in a romantic relationship with the doctor, Claire, and her two children, Ty and Marcus, we find out that he's a plant and that he's here to determine whether or not humanity and all biological life forms should be eradicated. And he's come back with the information, and his fellow Kalon decide that the biologicals must be destroyed. It's a pretty shocking twist. We always knew we wanted to do it. It was in the back of our minds, or the back of Seth's mind. I knew when we were conceiving the two-parter that this was another instance where the audience might reject it or they might love it. Regardless, it was a watershed moment, kind of like our very own Best of Both Worlds. This is where people are going to realize how great the show is, or they're going to say this is a betrayal. We hate this, and people liked it. Now, it didn't hurt that it was, you know, very well made and stunning visual effects and executed really well. The script was decent. So it all came together.
And I have to say, I'm very curious where you're going to go with his character in season 3, because the level of trust is gone, and he's going to have to build that back.
Wait till, all I can say is season 3 is not pulling any punches. We're not ignoring anything. Those things are explored without question. Season 3, I don't know. I think Seth would agree with me that season 3 is the best season yet. And it's going to be on Hulu now.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that a better thing for the show?
Seth wanted to move the show. It's not like the show was canceled on Fox. Seth wanted to move it because he wanted the freedom for the episodes to be longer. And just more creative freedom in general. And it was a very smart move, because the show is just, it's better than it's ever been. And it benefits from you know, in my opinion, not having commercial breaks and not having to be exactly 44 minutes long and all that stuff. It's been pretty liberating. I really understand why Seth wanted to do that now.
That's so cool. I can't wait.
It's a real treat. I have to say, season 3 is just like, I just watched a cut of the first episode and I'm like, holy shit, this thing is so much more ambitious and on every level. I'm really, really proud of it.
Oh, that's so awesome. Talk to me about writing with others. You write stuff yourself, obviously, but like on Orville now, you're writing with someone else.
Andre
You're writing with Andre. Yeah, who's the science consultant?
Oh, I've been writing with Andre since the Enterprise days. I have been so lucky in my career to have fellow writer collaborators that were far more talented than I was and who taught me so much, you know, whether it's Ron Moore or Andre Vormanis or Adam Simon or in the list there, Joe Minosky. You know, these are really special writers and I was lucky to work with them. And writing with a partner, I find, is just less lonely and less difficult. I mean, it's always difficult, but at least you're not by yourself and you can talk things through. And I really like and you know, it's just, you know, filmmaking is in general is a collaborative medium, and there's no reason that the writing process can't be collaborative. I mean, certainly I've written some episodes I'm really proud of by myself, but it's way more fun with another person.
The reason I asked that question is because I'm a novelist and I'm home by myself writing. And when the books come out, it's all just me. And just the opportunity to collaborate with people just sounds fascinating.
Yeah, well, TV is that way anyway. I mean, you know, some shows write all the scripts. It may have one name on the script, but they may have sat in a room, usually comedies, and written it as a group. And you know, in the case of, I've usually worked with fairly small writing staffs, but we're all together. We're all breaking down the stories together. It's rarely just one person goes off and writes a script. It's a group effort. You know, 24, I wrote with Manny Cotto on 24. And 24 was like a high wire act, man. It's like we were constantly writing, rewriting. We would take scripts and break them up into each 5 writers, each would get an act, and we pull it all together because you could get a script written in like 2 days that way, but you had to kind of piece it all together. Like 24 was intensely collaborative. Everybody worked on every script.
That's cool. And it 24 was amazing just in terms of you had to compact everything so much in a tight time frame and then make sure time was following real time when you're watching it.
Plus,
man,
you also had to make sure that things were clear. That was half the battle, was just making sure the audience knew what was happening. You know, it's like, it was a real magic trick. I was a fan of the show before I wrote for it, and I wanted to know how they did it. Turns out it's just a bunch of hard work.
Well, it definitely showed.
Same process.
So how do I do you prefer writing or directing now more?
They're different. Writing and directing are different parts of my brain. Writing will always be my first love. If I had to pick between the two, there's no question, I'm writing. But I have always been a filmmaker, and in that regard wanted to write and direct. And directing is it's a lot of hard, long hours, but it's fun. And it feels like a reward to me, you know. Hopefully, I like both for different reasons, and I hate both for different reasons. But writing really is more. It's just it's the creation process, and it's in some ways more deeply satisfying in that regard. I mean, I'm not Alfred Hitchcock, where I've created my own genre, you know. So directing is, you know, I'm still relatively new. I just directed my first movie, and so I'm not, you know, haven't been doing directing nearly as long as writing. So I'm probably not qualified to answer that question yet.
I'll come back in 5 years and ask.
I'm giving very, very long answers because I'm alone a lot.
Thank you for doing this. I'm learning so much from you, and I've been a fan for a long time, so thank you.
It's my pleasure.
So you mentioned you directed a film. I was going to ask you, besides working on Orville, what is next for you?
Well, right now, I've got a new season of Cosmos coming out on September 22nd on Fox and Hulu. And then I have a movie called Books of Blood, which is based on the Clive Barker anthology,
Love those.
anthology, and which I wrote with Adam Simon, who I did Salem with, and Clive Barker. I worked very closely with Clive in developing this movie, and Clive's a producer on the movie, and the movie is, for want of a less lofty comparison, kind of like the Pulp Fiction of horror. It has 3 storylines that cross-pollinate a little bit. And one's, there's a story from the Books of Blood, and there are 2 original stories that I cooked up with Clive. And so it's you know, could be the first of, let's put it this way, I'm thinking of this as volume 1. Whether there'll be a volume 2, I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how this one does. I don't have a release date yet for it, and when I wish I had more specific information. It's supposed to be released in October, but everything's on pause right now, so we're just going to have to see. I mean, the film is shot. I'm in post-production right now.
Okay.
And it's horror, you know, it's kind of psychological horror.
Well, I was a fan of the book, so I can't wait to see this. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, well, hopefully I get a chance to finish it.
And I know Orville, you still had a couple episodes left to do, so it'll probably be a while before we see those.
Oh yeah, we've got, I don't know, we might be halfway through the season, you know. I don't think there's a specific date yet for that. And I'm sorry the fans are going to have to wait a little longer, because we really want people to, you know, see this season. But I don't know. Everything's, because of this pandemic, everything's just in flux right now.
What is your fondest?
Hollywood shut down.
Right. Well, this is one of the reasons why I get an opportunity to talk to you, because we're all home stuck. And
right.
What is your fondest memory working on Star Trek?
There are so many fond memories I have working on Star Trek. I can't really single out one memory. But, you know, I just remember, I think it was the summertime, hanging outside, having a cigarette with Brent Spiner in his Data makeup on a break from shooting the movie First Contact, and just thinking, this is a really special time in my life, to be making a Star Trek movie with a bunch of people I love. And I've since quit smoking. So has Brent. Uh, you know, I remember being on the set of All Good Things when they were filming the final scene with the poker table, and Picard coming in, and Troy saying, "You were always welcome." You know, there were tears on the set when that scene was being shot. Even though we all knew we were about to go make a movie, we also knew that this was the end of something really special. And you really felt it. And I think it's because the emotions between these actors was real, and the people writing the show and producing the show, you know, the show was really important to us, and we knew how important it was to a lot of the fans. And so it was the emotions. If the people making it are feeling it, you're going to feel it too. And that was a nice memory.
Why do you think the franchise has endured for so long?
Why has Star Trek's longevity, I don't think, can be attributed to one thing. There are so many great things about Gene Roddenberry's creation, and those who have been lucky enough to work on it over the years. But my personal opinion is, first and foremost, they're good stories. He created a great premise, and there was just the quality of the writing is really good, and science fiction can explore topics and themes that maybe you couldn't normally, depending on the political and cultural climate. And so Star Trek it was forward thinking and told good stories. But beyond that, to me, the real secret to its longevity is its optimism. It's a future you want to live in. The Enterprise D, Picard's Enterprise, was a place you wanted to be, around people who weren't tainted with this usual primate crap that we have to deal with every single day. It's just, that to me is really, and that was an important part of Gene's vision for the show. And that's one of the reasons I love it. And, you know, I've been to my share of Star Trek conventions, and there's just a feeling when you get thousands of Star Trek fans together, and this is kind of an apt way to go out for your purposes, because this is your Star Trek convention got canceled or postponed, I imagine, which is why we're doing this right now. You get in a space with thousands of Star Trek fans, and you look out and you realize every single one of these people has a shared history. It's a fictional history, but it's a long history and a detailed history. And we all know it, and we can all talk about it. And it's a history of the future that hasn't happened yet, where things are good. And it's a good feeling to be around Star Trek fans. And that's the halo that Star Trek has, that I believe explains how long it's been around. Now, it doesn't hurt that there have been 1,000 episodes made. You know, that's a lot of the TV. But that's my opinion.
Oh, that is beautiful. And thank you for bringing back that vision with Seth and the Orville.
Oh, listen, we missed it. That's why we're doing it.
My last question to you is, can you give me a live long and prosper?
Oh, from me?
From you, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
well, it's if I can do it. This is where I got the gag with Seth from Cochrane at the end of First Contact, because I can't really do it. Live long and prosper.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much. Hang on a second. I'm going to stop this.